From the moment I walked into the room, I could feel the tension. Linda, my mother-in-law, was already boasting about how proud she was of her son's new girlfriend, me. I clenched my fists, knowing she had no idea that I had been documenting Mark's affair for months. The pretense of family togetherness felt like a thin veil over a festering wound. With divorce papers tucked safely in my bag, I had to act before the evening spiraled further out of control. I had a plan, and only a few hours until it would unfold. Every family gathering felt like a battlefield, but this one was different. I could sense the excitement in the air as Mark and Linda exchanged smug glances, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. They thought they could keep me in the dark, keep me silent while they played their little games. Little did they know, I was done being the good wife, the supportive daughter-in-law. I was ready to reclaim my power. As I scanned the room, I noticed familiar faces. Friends and family who had always been on the sidelines, witnesses to my struggle but never stepping in to help. I felt a mix of anger and determination. Why had I spent so long trying to fit into their mold, trying to please them? It was time to break free from their expectations and show them that I was more than just Mark's wife. When Linda started her usual chatter about how perfect Mark was, I felt my heart race. I had been living in their shadow for too long, pretending everything was fine while my world was crumbling. The thought of exposing the truth sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. I was ready to reveal the secrets I had kept hidden for far too long. I could no longer be the silent observer in my own life, and tonight they would see the real Sarah. Over the years, it became painfully clear that Mark was the favored child, adored by Linda while I was often sidelined. It wasn't just the lavish gifts or the constant praise. It was the way they dismissed my concerns about his late nights and unexplained absences. It was as if I were invisible in their eyes, just a placeholder in their perfect family narrative. I always felt like a burden to them, expected to keep the household running smoothly while Mark basked in their affection. I remember the first time I confronted Mark about his long hours at work. Instead of discussing it like adults, he brushed me off, saying I was overreacting, that I should trust him. And Linda? She was right there backing him up, telling me that a good wife should support her husband, no questions asked. Every time I cleaned up after him or supported his decisions, I felt my own worth diminish. I cooked the meals, organized family gatherings, and even attended events I didn't want to go to just to keep the peace. The more I did, the more I realized how little it mattered to them. They accepted my efforts as their due, never acknowledging the strain it put on me. I watched Mark receive praise for everything he did, while my contributions faded into the background, unrecognized and unappreciated. I remember one Christmas when I had spent weeks planning a surprise party for Mark. I hired a caterer, invited his friends, and even decorated the house. When the day came, all I wanted was for him to appreciate my hard work. Instead, he showed up late, stumbling in with Linda, who had brought a last-minute gift. They laughed and joked together, completely dismissing my efforts. I stood there feeling like a ghost in my own home, invisible to the very people I was trying to please. Now, as I watched Linda beam with pride at Mark's achievements, I felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. The urgency to reveal the truth intensified. I couldn't take it anymore. Mark was not just my husband, he was their golden boy, and I was the shadow lurking behind him, always trying to keep him in the spotlight. Linda's constant need to highlight his accomplishments only fueled my anger. Each praise-filled conversation felt like a jab to my self-esteem. Even the way they spoke about me, always in the past tense, made it clear how I was viewed in their eyes. Remember when Sarah did that? Or oh, Sarah used to make that dish all the time. It was as if I was a relic of their past, a fading memory that didn't hold any significance in their present. I was tired of being the dutiful wife, the one who always smiled and nodded while they indulged in their self-importance. As the evening progressed, I kept noticing Linda subtly directing the conversation back to Mark, steering it away from anything that might put him in a less-than-perfect light. It was almost as if she feared that any hint of imperfection would shatter the image they had built together. I felt sick watching it unfold. They were dismissing my feelings, my concerns, as if I were just a simple prop in their show. It was unacceptable, and it was time for me to take a stand. I could no longer be the background player in this twisted family dynamic. I had spent too long allowing their favoritism to dictate my worth. The thought of exposing the truth sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. I was ready to reveal the secrets I had kept hidden for far too long. I could no longer be the silent observer in my own life, and tonight they would see the real Sarah, the woman who had been pushed aside but was finally standing up for herself. In the midst of the gathering, I overheard a conversation between Linda and Mark, where they laughed about how easily I had been fooled into believing I was the perfect wife. It hit me like a cold wave, jolting me from my thoughts. I was nothing but a placeholder for Mark's ambitions, a trophy he could show off to his mother while he chased after his own dreams, leaving me in the dust. I felt my heart race as the reality of my situation sank in deeper. I wasn't just being deceived, I was being used. They stood there, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. Mark's laughter rang hollow, and Linda, with her smug smile, thought she could manipulate me forever. I had been the dutiful wife for too long, the one who kept everything together while they enjoyed their charade. No more. The weight of their expectations felt like a chain around my neck, pulling me down. I had spent years cleaning up after Mark, supporting his decisions, and trying to be the perfect daughter-in-law, all while he basked in the spotlight. I could feel my worth diminishing with every compliment Linda showered on him. It was time to stop allowing them to dictate my life, to stop being the silent observer in a story that was supposed to be mine. As I stood there, my hands clenched into fists, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living this lie. I had gathered evidence of Mark's betrayal over the months. Texts, photos, and dates that painted a clear picture of his infidelity. It was time to confront them, to reveal the truth that had been hidden in the shadows for far too long. I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through me, fueling my determination to take back my life. I glanced around the room, taking in the faces of family and friends who had always been passive observers to my suffering. They had seen the way Linda doted on Mark and dismissed my concerns, but they had never intervened. In that moment, I realized I could no longer care about their opinions or judgments. This was about me reclaiming my power and stepping out of the shadows. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of anticipation settle in my chest. As I moved to gather everyone in the living room, I felt a calm resolve wash over me. I would no longer be the good wife or the dutiful daughter-in-law. I was ready to expose the truth, ready to shatter the illusion they had created. I would not let them hide behind their facade any longer. With the divorce papers tucked away but not forgotten, I knew I had to act decisively. I could feel the tension in the air, the way they would try to dismiss me, to make me feel small. But tonight I would stand tall. Tonight they would see the real Sarah, the woman they had underestimated for far too long. As I approached the living room, I could hear Linda's voice, full of false pride as she recounted another one of Mark's accomplishments. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, the urge to reveal the truth bubbling up inside me. I had spent years being sidelined, letting them think I was just a supporting character in their play. No more. With each step I took, I could feel the adrenaline building. I was ready to expose the truth, ready to confront the lies that had become my reality. I would no longer be the silent observer, the woman hiding in the shadows. It was time for me to take center stage. As I gathered everyone, I could see the looks of confusion on their faces, the curiosity about what I had to say. I felt empowered, ready to reclaim my narrative. No longer would I be the woman who simply accepted their dismissive attitudes. I was ready to take control, and I would not back down. I gathered everyone in the living room, my hands steady as I took a breath. I knew I had to seize this moment, to cut through the pretense and lay everything on the table. The room was buzzing with chatter, laughter echoing off the walls, but I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This was it. I was done being a spectator in my own life. I know you're all excited about Mark's new girlfriend, I said, my voice slicing through the noise like a knife. The room fell silent, eyes turning toward me with a mix of curiosity and confusion. I could see Linda's smile falter, her eyes narrowing as she sensed the shift in the atmosphere. But I have something important to say. I reached into my bag and pulled out the divorce papers, the crisp pages a tangible representation of my determination. I placed them carefully on the coffee table, making sure everyone could see. I filed for divorce. I won't be part of this charade any longer. The shocked faces around me confirmed that I had crossed an invisible line. Linda's smug expression faltered, and Mark's face turned ashen, the color draining from his cheeks. I could feel the tension in the room crackling like static electricity. They were not prepared for this. and I reveled in their disbelief. Mark was the first to react, his voice rising in disbelief. "You can't be serious, Sarah," he exclaimed, desperation lacing his tone. "You're tearing this family apart." I could see Linda's hands tighten into fists at her sides, her eyes flashing with anger. They were trying to intimidate me, to make me doubt myself, but I stood firm, refusing to back down. "Tearing the family apart?" I shot back, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling around me. "You've been doing that for years, Mark, and I've been too blind to see it. This isn't about family loyalty. It's about me reclaiming my life. I won't let you two manipulate me any longer." Linda stepped forward, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "You're being selfish, Sarah. Do you know how hard we've worked to keep this family together? You have no idea what it means to sacrifice for those you love." Her voice dripped with false concern, but I could see through her facade. She was more worried about her image than my feelings. "Sacrifice?" I could feel my voice rising, fueled by a mixture of anger and empowerment. "You mean the sacrifices you've expected me to make while you both play happy family? I've been the one holding everything together, and all I've gotten in return is your disdain and Mark's betrayal." Mark's expression shifted from shock to anger as he realized I wasn't backing down. "You've ruined everything. This is all your fault," he shouted, his eyes wild with rage. I could feel the adrenaline rushing through my veins, but I refused to let their attacks shake me. They were desperate, and their anger only highlighted their vulnerability. I stood there, feeling a sense of validation as the guests exchanged glances of disbelief. They were witnessing the truth unravel before their eyes, and for the first time, I felt like I was finally breaking free from their toxic hold. I wasn't just standing up for myself. I was exposing the truth that had been hidden in the shadows for too long. As the evening progressed, I could see the emotions swirling in the room. Linda and Mark attempted to manipulate the narrative, trying to paint me as the villain in their story. The whispers of disbelief from the guests began to echo around the room, and I could sense the shift in perception happening right before my eyes. "How could you do this to her?" a family friend asked, shaking his head in disbelief. The question hung in the air, and I felt a surge of pride knowing that I had brought the truth to light. Mark stumbled over his words, unable to justify his actions, while Linda's composure began to crack. They were unraveling, and I was finally free from their grip. I took a deep breath, allowing the weight of the moment to wash over me. I had taken control of my narrative, and I felt lighter, the fear that had once held me captive beginning to dissipate. I had been a player in their game for too long, but tonight I was reclaiming my power. This wasn't just about the divorce. It was about liberating myself from the chains they had wrapped around me for years. I was done being the supportive wife and the dutiful daughter-in-law. I was ready to stand on my own, to embrace the freedom that came with honesty and self-respect. No longer would I be defined by their expectations or their toxic love. As I looked around the room, I saw the faces of those who had witnessed my struggle. I felt a sense of empowerment surge through me, knowing that I had taken the first step towards my new life. The chaos around me was a small price to pay for the peace I was about to reclaim. I was ready to embrace my new normal, free from the shackles of their toxic influence. As the night progressed, Linda and Mark attempted to manipulate my emotions in every way possible. Linda, with her sweet yet condescending tone, leaned in closer to me, her voice dripping with false concern. "You can't just leave us like this, Sarah. You're tearing this family apart." Her eyes were wide, but I could see the underlying threat. She was trying to guilt me into submission, as if my leaving would somehow shatter their perfect little world. Mark chimed in next, his voice rising with indignation. "You know how much this family has been through. You're just going to throw it all away?" The frustration in his voice was palpable, and I could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. They were desperate to hold on to the facade of a happy family, and I was the one threatening to pull the curtain back. But their words fell flat. I could see their true colors shining through, and I felt nothing but a sense of empowerment. They were more concerned about how my actions would affect their reputation than about my feelings, or the truth of the situation. I had spent years trying to keep the peace, trying to fit into the mold they had created for me, and now I refused to play that role any longer. "You talk about family loyalty, but what about my loyalty?" I shot back, my voice steady. "You both have been living in a fantasy world where everything revolves around Mark. I've been the one holding everything together while you two have your little charade. I won't be manipulated any longer. I deserve better than this. Their attempts to guilt-trip me only fueled my determination to stand my ground. I was done being the dutiful wife who accepted their dismissive attitudes without question. I was breaking free from the chains they had wrapped around me for years, and nothing they said could make me doubt my decision. Linda's expression shifted from concern to anger, her voice rising as she insisted, "But you have no idea how hard we've worked to keep this family together. You're being selfish, Sarah." Her words were meant to sting, to make me feel like I was the bad guy in this scenario. But I had grown tired of being the scapegoat for their failures. This wasn't about me tearing apart a family. It was about me reclaiming my life from the toxic environment they had created. Mark, increasingly agitated, shouted, "You're ruining everything. You're just trying to make us look bad." I could see the panic in his eyes as the realization hit him that I was serious about this divorce. They were both scrambling to regain control of the narrative, but I was done playing their game. I took a deep breath, feeling the strength of my convictions wash over me. This isn't about trying to ruin your family. It's about me finally standing up for myself, something I should have done a long time ago. I've spent years being sidelined, feeling invisible while you both bask in your own glow. No more. The tension in the room was thick, the air charged with uncertainty. Guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to react. Some looked at me with sympathy, others with disbelief, but I didn't care. I was finally breaking free from their toxicity, and I could feel a wave of liberation washing over me. Linda, clearly rattled, attempted to regain her composure. "You don't understand the consequences of your actions, Sarah. You'll regret this." Her threats hung in the air, but I felt nothing but relief. I had been living in their shadow for too long, and their attempts to manipulate me only highlighted their desperation. I realized then that they were more afraid of losing their grip on me than of actually losing their family dynamic. I was the one who had been holding everything together, and now that I was ready to walk away, their world was crumbling. I could see it in their eyes, the fear of losing control, of being exposed for the toxic individuals they truly were. As I stood there, I felt a sense of validation wash over me. I had finally found my voice, and I was ready to use it. I wouldn't be manipulated any longer, and I wasn't going to let them guilt me into silence. This was my moment to reclaim my power, to assert my worth, and I was determined to see it through. The chaos around me began to fade into the background as I focused on my own truth. I had made the decision to file for divorce, and I was no longer going to let them dictate my life. I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I knew I was going to face backlash and anger, but I also knew that this was the first step towards my freedom. I was ready to embrace the challenges ahead, knowing that I was finally taking control of my destiny. During dinner, I could feel the tension in the air as Linda, with her manipulative flair, casually brought up Mark's new girlfriend. It was as if she was throwing a grenade into a room full of gas, hoping for a fiery explosion. Her voice dripped with a false sweetness that only made my skin crawl. "Isn't it exciting, everyone? Mark has found someone special," she exclaimed, her eyes glinting with a satisfaction that made my stomach turn. I could feel all eyes on me, the guests shifting in their seats, waiting to see how I would react. They had seen the way Linda doted on Mark, the way she had always tried to place him on a pedestal while I stood in the shadows. The anticipation in the room was palpable, and I could sense the pressure building around me like a tightening noose. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of the evidence I had prepared. I had the truth on my side, and I refused to let them provoke me into silence any longer. "You mean the woman he's been cheating on me with?" "I have proof," I replied, my voice steady, cutting through the tension like a knife. The room fell completely silent, the air thick with disbelief and anticipation. Linda's eyes widened, her facade slipping for a moment as she processed my words. Mark's face turned an alarming shade of crimson, and I could see the panic start to creep in. I was no longer the good wife who would sit back and take it. I was ready to expose the truth for what it was. With a calmness I didn't know I possessed, I pulled out my phone, my heart racing as I opened the file filled with the documented evidence of Mark's betrayal. Texts, photos, dates. It was all there, irrefutable proof of his infidelity. "Here's the proof of Mark's affair," I stated firmly, holding my phone up for everyone to see. I handed the phone to Linda, watching her expression shift from disbelief to horror. The room was silent as she scrolled through the messages, her grip on the device tightening as she realized the extent of Mark's deceit. Guests started shifting uncomfortably, whispers of disbelief filling the air. I felt a rush of adrenaline surge through me. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Mark's face twisted in fury as he shouted, "You've ruined everything. This is all your fault." His eyes were wild with rage, but I stood my ground, refusing to let his anger shake me. Linda chimed in, her voice rising in a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. "You should have kept your mouth shut. You're just trying to ruin our family." Their attacks rolled off my back like water off a duck. I could see their desperation, the way they were trying to shift the blame back onto me. It was almost laughable, how they were more concerned about their reputations than the truth I had just laid bare. I had spent years trying to keep the peace, trying to fit into their mold, but now I was breaking free. "This isn't about you or this so-called family," I replied, my voice steady. "It's about me finally standing up for myself. I've been the one holding everything together while you two played happy family, and I refuse to be manipulated any longer." The whispers grew louder, the shock of my revelation rippling through the guests like a wave. I could see the disbelief etched on their faces, many exchanging glances as they processed what they had just witnessed. Linda's composure was slipping away, and for the first time I felt a rush of power. Their world was crumbling right before my eyes, and I reveled in the feeling of liberation. Mark stammered, searching for words, but all he could manage was a jumbled mess of excuses. The truth was now laid out in front of everyone, and he had no way to justify his actions. Linda's attempts to redirect the blame only highlighted their desperation, and I felt a sense of validation wash over me. I had finally broken free from their toxic hold, and it felt incredible. I was no longer the silent observer in my own life. I was taking control, and I wouldn't let them dictate my narrative any longer. The chaos around me was a small price to pay for the freedom I had just reclaimed. As the night continued, I could see the shift in the room. Guests began to murmur, questions echoing in the air. "How could you do this to her?" a family friend finally asked, shaking his head in disbelief. The question hung in the air, and I felt a surge of pride knowing that I had brought the truth to light. Mark looked vulnerable, caught off guard without my support. I could see the fear creeping into his eyes as he realized he had lost control. The whispers of disbelief continued to swirl around the room, and for the first time, I felt light, unburdened from the chains they had wrapped around me for so long. I had taken a stand, and I could feel the weight of my decision lifting. The fear that had once held me captive was dissipating as I embraced the freedom that came with honesty. This wasn't just about the divorce. It was about reclaiming my life from the toxicity that had defined it for too long. I was finally stepping into my power, ready to embrace the challenges ahead with a newfound strength. Instead of launching into an emotional tirade, I calmly pulled out my phone. I opened the file with all the documented evidence, texts, photos, and dates. "Here's the proof of Mark's affair," I stated, my voice cutting through the tension. "He's been lying to you all and to me." I handed the phone to Linda, who stared at the screen in disbelief. The chaos I had feared began to unfold as Mark's face turned crimson, and Linda's composure shattered. As Linda scrolled through the messages, I could see the realization dawning on her. The pride she had just displayed moments ago was replaced by a look of horror and betrayal. "How could he do this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I stood there, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and vindication. The truth was finally out, and there was no turning back now. Mark, however, wasn't ready to accept defeat. His anger flared, and he lunged forward, his hands clenched into fists. "You've ruined everything," he shouted, his face twisted in fury. "This is all your fault. You're the one making this public." I felt a rush of adrenaline as his accusations flew at me. "No, Mark," I replied, my voice steady. "You're the one who made this public by being unfaithful. I'm just shining a light on the truth that you've tried so hard to keep hidden." The room was thick with tension, and the guests were frozen in place, eyes darting between us, unsure of how to react. Some wore expressions of sympathy for me, others looked shocked at Mark's outburst. I could feel their eyes on me, and it gave me strength. Linda, still holding my phone, looked back at Mark, her expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. "How could you do this to Sarah?" she demanded, her voice rising. I could see the cracks in her facade appearing as she struggled to reconcile her son's actions with the image she had created of a perfect family. Mark opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He was clearly rattled, and I reveled in the moment. For so long he had treated me like I was nothing, like I was beneath him. But now, with the truth exposed, he was the one who looked small and weak. "You think you can just throw away everything we've built?" Mark shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. He was grasping at straws, trying to regain control of the situation. "You're being selfish, Sarah." I shook my head, refusing to let his words get to me. "Selfish would be me staying silent while you continue to lie and deceive. I've spent years being the supportive wife, the one who kept this family together while you played games. I won't be silent anymore. I deserve better than this." As I spoke, I could feel the energy in the room shift. Guests began to murmur amongst themselves, their initial shock giving way to disbelief and sympathy for me. I had finally stood up for myself, and it felt incredible to reclaim my power. Mark's face twisted in anger, and he took a step toward me, his voice low and threatening. "You have no idea what you're doing. You're tearing this family apart." But I stood my ground, feeling a newfound strength surge through me. "No, Mark. You're the one who has been tearing this family apart with your lies and betrayal. I'm just the one finally putting an end to it. I won't let you manipulate me or anyone else any longer." Linda, who had been silent for a moment, suddenly interjected, her voice sharp. "You think you're being brave, but all you're doing is making a fool of yourself. You'll regret this, Sarah." Her words fell flat, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. It was clear she was more concerned about the public image of their family than about my feelings or the truth of what had happened. The facade was cracking, and I was determined to keep pushing. "Regret?" I scoffed, feeling a surge of confidence. "The only regret I have is not doing this sooner. I've spent too long trying to make things work with someone who only sees me as a stepping stone to his own ambitions. No more." The guests were whispering among themselves now, the truth spreading like wildfire. I could see the disbelief on their faces, the way they were beginning to question everything they had thought they knew about Mark. I felt a sense of vindication wash over me. I turned to Linda, who was still reeling from the revelations. "You can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. This family isn't perfect, and I refuse to be a part of this charade any longer." Linda's expression shifted from anger to fear as she realized the implications of what I was saying. I could see the panic in her eyes as she began to grasp the reality of the situation. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Mark finally broke the silence, his voice strained. "You'll pay for this, Sarah. You think you can just walk away?" I met his gaze, unwavering. "I already have paid for it, Mark. I've paid with my happiness, my self-worth, and my peace of mind. But now I'm reclaiming what's mine. You can't scare me anymore." As I looked around the room, I realized that I had finally stepped into my power. The chaos that had once defined my life was now giving way to a sense of freedom I had never known. The guests were watching, some with sympathy, others with shock, but I didn't care. I had taken control of my narrative, and it felt incredible. Mark and Linda were unraveling before me, their attempts to manipulate and control no longer working. I had exposed the truth, and now it was time for me to move forward, leaving their toxic influence behind. I was ready to embrace my new life, free from the chains of their lies. Instead of apologizing, Mark exploded in anger. "You've ruined everything. This is all your fault," he shouted, his eyes wild with rage. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, but I stood firm, refusing to let his outburst shake me. Linda, always ready to defend her son, jumped in, her voice dripping with indignation. "How could you do this, Sarah? You're tearing this family apart." Their reactions were predictable, but it didn't matter. I had prepared for this moment, and their anger only solidified my resolve. I had spent years being the quiet one, the supportive wife who always put everyone else's needs before my own. No more. I took a deep breath, grounding myself in the truth of what I had just exposed. "No, you're the ones who have been tearing this family apart with your lies and deceit. I'm just finally standing up for myself, and I won't be bullied into silence any longer." The tension in the room escalated as Mark's face twisted in fury. "You think this is about you? This is about us. You're just making it worse for everyone." He was desperate, trying to regain control of the narrative. I could see Linda's expression shift from anger to fear as she realized their carefully constructed facade was crumbling. This isn't about you or your precious family, Mark. I shot back, my voice steady. It's about me finally taking a stand. I've been the one holding everything together while you both played happy families, and I refuse to be manipulated any longer. Mark's anger only intensified. You don't understand what you're doing. You're ruining everything we've built. His voice was rising, and I could see the desperation in his eyes. I shook my head, refusing to let his words sway me. What you've built is based on lies and betrayal. I'm not the one ruining this, you are. I didn't ask for any of this. I just want to be free. The guests around us were shifting uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Mark and me, caught in the middle of this emotional storm. I could feel their judgment, but I didn't care. I had come too far to turn back now. Linda, still clutching my phone, looked at me with disdain. You think you're being brave? You're just making a fool of yourself. You'll regret this, Sarah. Her voice was sharp, but I could see the cracks in her confidence. Regret? I laughed bitterly. The only regret I have is not doing this sooner. I've spent too long trying to make things work with someone who only sees me as a stepping stone to his own ambitions. No more. Mark's face twisted in anger as he struggled to respond. You're tearing this family apart. He shouted again, but his voice lacked conviction. Tearing it apart? You did that the moment you decided to cheat on me. I replied, my voice rising. I'm done being the good wife who quietly accepts your betrayal. I deserve better than this. The tension in the room was palpable, the guests exchanging glances, their expressions a mix of shock and sympathy for me. I could feel the power of the truth coursing through me, pushing me to stand my ground. Mark, realizing he was losing control, took a step closer, his fists clenched. You think you can just walk away from this? You have no idea what you're doing. I met his gaze, unwavering. I do know what I'm doing, Mark. I'm reclaiming my life from the two of you. I won't let you manipulate me or anyone else any longer. Linda was silent, her expression shifting from anger to fear as the reality of the situation set in. I could see the panic in her eyes as she struggled to maintain her grip on the narrative. You're making a huge mistake, Sarah, she finally said, her voice trembling. I shook my head, a sense of calm washing over me. No, I'm making a choice to choose myself for once. I've been silent for too long, and I refuse to be a part of this charade any longer. The whispers among the guests grew louder, questions echoing in the air. I could hear them asking, how could Mark do this? And I felt a rush of vindication. I had finally stood up for myself, and it felt incredible. Mark looked vulnerable for the first time, caught off guard without my support. I could see the fear creeping into his eyes, realizing he had lost control of the situation. I turned to Linda, who was still reeling from the revelations. You can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. This family isn't perfect, and I refuse to be a part of this facade any longer. Her facade was crumbling, and I felt a sense of empowerment as I continued. You've both treated me like I'm invisible, but I'm done being the quiet one. I deserve to be heard. Mark's face twisted in anger, his voice rising again. You'll pay for this, Sarah. You think you can just walk away? I met his gaze, unwavering. I already have paid for it, Mark. I've paid with my happiness and my self-worth. But now I'm reclaiming what's mine. You can't scare me anymore. As I looked around the room, I realized that I had finally stepped into my power. The chaos that had once defined my life was now giving way to a sense of freedom I had never known. The guests were watching, some with sympathy, others with shock, but I didn't care. I had taken control of my narrative, and it felt incredible. Mark and Linda were unraveling before me, their attempts to manipulate and control no longer working. I had exposed the truth, and now it was time for me to move forward, leaving their toxic influence behind. As the night continued, the truth became undeniable. Guests began to question how Mark could ever be trusted again. How could you do this to her? A family friend asked, shaking his head. The whispers of disbelief echoed around the room, and for the first time, Mark looked vulnerable without my support. He stumbled over his words, unable to justify his actions. The realization struck me. I had released myself from their toxic hold. I felt lighter, and fear began to dissipate. Mark's defensiveness only made things worse for him. The guests were no longer looking at me with pity. Their gazes were now directed at him, full of judgment. I stood back, feeling a sense of satisfaction as the tide turned against him. He was cornered, and the facade he'd built around himself was crumbling. Linda was still holding my phone, her hands trembling slightly as she processed the evidence. I could see the conflict in her eyes, a mix of disbelief and anger. She had always taken pride in her son, and now, faced with the truth, her world was spiraling out of control. "You're lying, right? This can't be real," she stammered, looking back and forth between Mark and me, as if expecting one of us to take it all back. I shook my head, my heart racing with adrenaline. "It's all real, Linda. This is what Mark has been doing behind closed doors while pretending to be the perfect son and husband. You need to accept it. This isn't just about me. It's about how he's treated you and everyone else who believed in him." Mark's face twisted in anger, his earlier bravado replaced by panic. "You don't know what you're talking about. This is just a misunderstanding, and you're making a fool of yourself." His voice was rising, and I could see the desperation clawing at him. He was losing control and it felt good to witness. "A misunderstanding?" I scoffed, my voice steady and unwavering. "This is your reality, Mark. You've been lying to everyone, including yourself. You're not the victim here. You made your choices and now you have to face the consequences." The guests were murmuring amongst themselves, and I could feel their pity turning into outrage. For once I wasn't the only one feeling wronged. I had exposed the truth and it was resonating with them. I could see the realization dawning on their faces as they processed what had just unfolded. They were beginning to see Mark for who he really was, and it was liberating. Linda, struggling to maintain her composure, tried to shift the blame back to me. "You're destroying our family. You're the one who brought this all to light." Her voice was sharp, but I could see the fear flickering in her eyes. She was losing her grip on the narrative she had crafted for years. "I didn't destroy anything, Linda. Mark did that all on his own. I'm merely giving everyone a chance to see the truth instead of hiding behind lies and manipulation. You deserve to know what kind of person he really is. You've raised a man who thinks he can get away with anything, and I won't stand for it anymore." The tension in the room continued to build, and I could see the guests exchanging glances, their expressions shifting from shock to disbelief. I could feel the power of the truth surging through me, and it was exhilarating. I was no longer the silent partner in this twisted family dynamic. I was reclaiming my narrative. As I stood there, I watched as Mark's bravado began to falter. The anger that had fueled his earlier outbursts was now replaced with the look of defeat. He was trapped and the walls were closing in. "You've gone too far, Sarah. This isn't how things are supposed to be," he shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. I took a deep breath, feeling empowered by the moment. This is exactly how it's supposed to be. I've spent years trying to make things work while you've disrespected me and our marriage. I'm done playing nice. I deserve to be treated with respect, and I'm not going to let you or anyone else dictate how my story ends. The guests were shifting uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Mark and me. It felt like a reckoning was happening right before my eyes. I could see the gears turning in their minds as they began to question everything they thought they knew about Mark and our relationship. Linda looked at me, her expression shifting from anger to something resembling fear. "You're making a huge mistake, Sarah. You don't know what you're getting into." Her voice trembled, and I could see she was struggling to maintain her composure. I stood my ground, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. "No, Linda. You're the one who has been living in denial. I'm finally facing the truth, and I won't be silenced any longer. I refuse to be part of this toxic environment any longer." The whispers around the room grew louder, and I could feel the tide of sympathy shifting in my direction. I had taken a stand and it felt incredible. I had exposed the truth, and the guests were beginning to see Mark's betrayal for what it truly was. Mark's expression twisted in anger, but it was clear he was losing control. The evidence was irrefutable, and I could see the realization dawning on the faces of the people around us. They were beginning to understand that I had been the one living in a nightmare while he played the perfect husband. "You'll regret this, Sarah," Mark shouted, his voice filled with rage, but I felt nothing but relief. I had finally taken control of my own narrative, and I was ready to embrace the freedom that came with it. As the chaos unfolded around me, I felt lighter, liberated from the weight of their expectations. I had taken my power back and I was no longer afraid. I was ready to move forward to reclaim my life and leave the toxicity behind. Days turned into weeks, and life without Mark felt strangely peaceful. I took control of my future, focusing on rebuilding my life. I distanced myself from Linda and the toxic remnants of my past. Whenever I received a call from them, I simply turned my phone off. I had finally found my strength, and I no longer needed their approval or affection. I had learned the power of self-respect, and it was liberating. My victory was not just in the divorce but in the freedom I had gained from their toxicity. I threw myself into my career, working hard and pushing for that promotion I had long deserved. I bought a small apartment, one that felt like a fresh start, and furnished it with pieces that reflected my taste, not theirs. I spent weekends taking road trips to places I had always wanted to visit, but never had the chance to go with Mark. I felt alive again, and every day was a reminder of how far I had come. I also made new friends, people who appreciated me for who I truly was, not the shadow of someone else's expectations. We shared laughter and stories over coffee, and I realized how much I had missed genuine connection. The more I distanced myself from my past, the more I understood my worth. Occasionally, I would hear gossip about Mark and his attempts to paint me as the villain, but it no longer affected me. I had found my peace in the silence of my own company and the joy of my independence. I no longer felt the need to justify my choices to anyone. I had